the day my husband James sold our $2 million ranch to his girlfriend for $5. He expected tears. Instead, I smiled. Not the broken smile of a defeated woman, but the knowing smile of someone who had seen the betrayal coming months before. While he was busy sneaking around, I'd been quietly securing my future. He thought he was dealing with a trusting fool. What he didn't realize was that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the sound of a woman who's already won. James and I had been married for 12 years. We met in college. He was the charming business major from old money, and I was the practical finance student on scholarship. Everyone said we complemented each other perfectly. His vision and my execution, his family connections, and my analytical mind, his dreams, and my practicality. After graduation, I worked for a prestigious financial firm while James joined his father's investment company. We were the power couple. Our friends envied young, ambitious, and seemingly unstoppable. When his parents gave us a generous wedding gift, we used it as a down payment on our first home, a modest 3-bedroom in a nice suburb outside of Denver. Those early years were good. We worked hard, saved aggressively, and built our life brick by brick. I climbed the corporate ladder while James expanded his family's business into new markets. We didn't have children, both of us were focused on our careers, and there was always time for that later, or so we thought. 5 years ago, James inherited a substantial sum when his grandfather passed away. That same month, I closed a major deal at work that earned me the biggest bonus of my career. It felt like the universe was telling us it was time for a change. "Let's buy some land," James suggested one evening over dinner. "Something with potential. Something we can build into something special." The idea resonated with me. We'd both grown up visiting relatives in the countryside, and the peace of rural life had always called to us. After months of searching, we found it 500 acres of pristine Montana land with breathtaking mountain views, a crystal, clear creek, and enough flat terrain to build whatever we could imagine. "This is it, Cindy," James whispered the first time we stood on the ridge, overlooking what would become our home. "This is where we build our legacy." The purchase wasn't simple. The land was divided into several parcels with different zoning restrictions. Some portions had been in agricultural use, others were undeveloped wilderness. The complexity didn't deter me. My finance background prepared me for navigating the intricate ownership structure we created to optimize tax benefits. We poured everything into transforming that land into Whispering Pines Ranch. James designed the main house, a stunning 6,000 square foot lodge with floor, 2 ceiling windows that framed the mountains like living artwork. I managed the finances, created the business plan, and handled the endless permits and legal requirements. 2 years of construction later, we moved in. The ranch became more than our home. It became our business. We hosted corporate retreats, exclusive hunting expeditions, and luxury glamping experiences. My role evolved from corporate executive to full-time ranch business manager. I oversaw our staff of 12, managed the books, and handled the marketing. James became the charming host, the storyteller who captivated our guests with tales of Montana history and wildlife. Our reputation grew. Whispering Pines was featured in luxury travel magazines. Celebrities discreetly booked stays. We expanded, adding guest cabins, a state, of, the, art barn, and even a small vineyard, as an experiment. The value of our property skyrocketed to over $2 million, not just in raw land and buildings, but in the brand and business we'd created. The success should have brought us closer, but something shifted. James started traveling more business trips to Seattle to meet with potential investors for expanding the ranch concept, he said. At first, it was once a month, then twice. Soon, he was gone every other week. I noticed small changes. His phone password changed. He started taking calls outside. Late-night texts made his phone buzz, but he'd quickly dismiss them as work stuff. When I asked about the investors, his answers became vague, lacking the specific details the old James would have enthusiastically shared. Then my cousin Allison started appearing more frequently at the ranch. She'd moved to Montana a year after we did, opening a struggling interior design business in the nearest town. James suggested we throw some business her way, letting her redesign our guest cabins. I agreed. Family helps family, after all. Allison was everything I wasn't: artistic, spontaneous, effortlessly glamorous, even in riding boots and jeans. Our guests loved her. She started helping with events, adding her designer's touch to our retreat weekends. James praised her contributions endlessly. "She just gets the vision," he'd say, in a tone that somehow implied I didn't. Our 12th anniversary approached. James had a critical meeting in Seattle, apologizing profusely that we couldn't celebrate together. These investors could take Whispering Pines National, Cindy. Imagine our concept in Colorado, Wyoming, even California. I smiled and told him I understood. Then I booked my own flight to Seattle, planning to surprise him after his meeting. We could still have a romantic anniversary dinner, even if it wasn't on the exact date. The surprise was mine when I walked into the upscale restaurant where the concierge said Mr. Thompson had a reservation. There was James, not with investors, but with Allison. They weren't discussing business. Their hands were intertwined on the table, his thumbs stroking her wrist in the same way he used to stroke mine. I watched as he leaned forward and kissed her, not the quick peck of family or friends, but the lingering kiss of lovers. I didn't confront them. I didn't cause a scene. I simply turned around, went back to my hotel, and changed my return flight. As the plane took off, I looked out the window and made myself a promise. I would not be the victim of their story. The ranch felt different when I returned, tainted by knowledge I couldn't unlearn. Every corner held memories now overlaid with questions. Had they laughed at me in the kitchen while I made them coffee? Had they exchanged knowing glances across the dinner table while I obliviously discussed ranch business? I maintained my routine. I managed the books, organized the upcoming events, and greeted our guests with my professional smile. If James noticed any change in me, he didn't mention it. Perhaps he was too preoccupied with his deception to notice mine. Over breakfast, 3 days after my return, I casually mentioned that I'd considered surprising him in Seattle. "Thank goodness you didn't," he laughed, not meeting my eyes. Those investor meetings ran late into the night. I barely had time to eat or sleep. "Sounds intense," I replied, buttering my toast with steady hands. "Allison called while you were gone, by the way. Something about fabric samples for the new cabins." "Did she?" His voice was carefully neutral. "I'll call her back today." I'm sure he did. That night, I waited until James fell asleep before slipping into his office. We had always maintained a policy of transparency with our finances, joint accounts, shared passwords, no secrets. At least, that had been our agreement. I wondered what other agreements he had broken. The computer asked for a password I no longer knew. No matter, I had other ways to access our information. The next morning, I drove to town and visited our bank. As owner of all our accounts, I had every right to request statements. The manager knew me well. I was the one who handled all our banking. The statements revealed a pattern of cash withdrawals: $3,000 here, $5,000 there, small enough not to raise immediate alarms, but substantial when added together. Over $40,000 in the past 6 months, withdrawn from ATMs in Seattle and our local town. That same day, I called my old mentor from my finance days, Caroline West. We met for lunch in Bozeman, far enough from our small town to avoid gossip. "Just hypothetically," I said, after we'd ordered, "if someone wanted to protect their assets from a potential divorce, what would you suggest?" Caroline's sharp eyes studied me. "Hypothetically, I'd say that person is already behind if they're just starting to think about it. The best asset protection begins long before there's any hint of divorce. And if that hypothetical person's spouse might be moving money already, then that person needs to document everything, Consult with a good lawyer, actually. Make that 3 different specialized lawyers and prepare for war while appearing to maintain peace. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Back at the ranch, James had a new proposal. I've been talking with our accountant about restructuring the ranch ownership for tax purposes, he said over dinner. With the growth we're experiencing, we could save thousands by creating a new LLC structure. Sounds smart, I agreed, taking a sip of wine to hide my expression. What would that involve? Just some paperwork. Nothing that would change our actual ownership, just how it looks on paper. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I can handle all the details. No need for you to worry about the technical stuff. The technical stuff had always been my domain. His dismissal confirmed my suspicions. Whatever you think is best, I said, playing the trusting wife while my mind calculated my next moves. The next morning, I discovered a burner phone while organizing James's closet hidden in the pocket of his rarely used winter coat. I knew I should leave it alone. I knew looking would only bring pain. I looked anyway. The messages between James and Allison went back nearly 2 years. 2 years of lies, 2 years of betrayal. And worse than the evidence of their physical affair were their conversations about me. She has no idea, James had written. Too busy with her spreadsheets to notice the real world around her. Poor Cindy, Allison replied. Always the accountant, never the visionary. She'll never understand what we're building. They discussed their future, their plans for after James left me. How they would transform the ranch into an exclusive resort. How Allison's design aesthetic was what the place had always needed. The money's nearly in place. Read a message from just 2 weeks ago. Another month? Maybe 2. And we can move forward. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and walked to the creek that ran through our property. The water had carved this path through rock and earth over thousands of years, patient, persistent, unstoppable. I decided to be the water. The next phase required precision and secrecy. I needed to understand exactly what we owned, what it was worth, and how vulnerable it might be to whatever scheme James was planning. I drove to the county seat and requested copies of all deeds, titles, and legal filings related to our properties. The ranch had been purchased as 7 separate parcels, each with its own deed and specific legal status. Some were in our joint names. Others were in the name of our primary LLC. Still, others were under subsidiary companies we had created for tax purposes. Quite a complex setup you folks have, remarked the clerk, Betty, as she helped me gather the documents. James loves complexity, I replied with a smile. Me, I prefer clarity. Don't we all? Betty said with a knowing look that made me wonder if small-town gossip had already caught wind of something I had missed. I spent the next week creating a comprehensive inventory of our assets, not just the land and buildings, but every vehicle, piece of equipment, artwork, and investment tied to the ranch. I photographed valuable items, recorded serial numbers, and compiled purchase receipts. During this time, James became unusually generous. He brought home an expensive necklace just because. He suggested we take a vacation once these investor meetings are finalized. He even proposed renovating our master bathroom into a luxury spa. You work so hard, Cindy. You deserve some luxury in your daily life. Each gift, each kind gesture, felt like a down payment on his guilt. I accepted them all with convincing gratitude while continuing my investigation. One Tuesday, I returned from town to find surveyors on our property. When I asked James about them, he waved away my concern. Just routine updates for the county tax assessment. Nothing to worry about. But the surveyors were focusing on very specific boundaries. The lines between parcels that had different ownership structures within our complex arrangement. That night, I called the survey company, posing as our ranch office manager, and requested copies of the work order. They were not working for the county. They had been hired by our lawyer, Jeffrey Stanford. The following day, I made an appointment with Jeffrey, telling his secretary it was about estate planning updates. Jeffrey had handled the legal work for our ranch since the beginning. He seemed surprised to see me alone. James usually handles these matters, he said, shifting uncomfortably in his leather chair. We're dividing and conquering these days, I replied smoothly. Too much happening at once. I've taken on the long-term planning while he focuses on expansion. Jeffrey relaxed slightly. Smart approach. What can I help you with? I'm trying to get a clear picture of our current structure before making any estate updates. Could you walk me through the exact ownership breakdown as it stands today? The conversation revealed that Jeffrey was indeed working on restructuring plans, though he was careful not to share specifics. James has some innovative ideas about protecting and leveraging the ranch assets, was all he would say. My next stop was a different law firm in Billings, one specializing in high-value divorces and asset protection. I paid the consultation fee in cash. I need to understand what I'm up against, I told the attorney, Paula Richardson, after explaining my situation. And what options I have. Paula's assessment was blunt. Based on what you've described, your husband is likely preparing to transfer assets or create a situation where the ranch appears less valuable or less attributable to the marital estate. The surveying of internal boundaries is particularly concerning. What can I do? Document everything. Get appraisals. And, if possible, secure your interests in the most valuable parts of the property before he makes his move. On the drive home, my phone rang. It was our ranch manager, Dave. Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Thompson has asked for a full inventory and valuation of all the equipment and livestock. Said it's for insurance purposes. Thank you for letting me know, Dave. Did he happen to mention which insurance company he's working with? Someone new, I think. The paperwork had some company called Meridian Holdings on it. I had never heard of Meridian Holdings. A quick internet search revealed nothing relevant. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. That evening, James announced he had taken out a business loan to fund some improvements to the ranch. The investors are very interested, but they want to see some upgrades before committing. I've secured $300,000 to get started. That's a significant loan, I said carefully. Which assets did you use as collateral? Just the usual business assets? Nothing to worry about. He kissed the top of my head. Trust me, it's going to pay off big time. The next day, I discovered what business assets meant. James had used our entire ranch as collateral for a loan that had not gone into any business account I managed. Further investigation revealed that Meridian Holdings was a newly formed LLC with Allison as the sole registered agent. The pieces were falling into place. James had taken out a massive loan against our property and funneled the money into Allison's failing design business, now disguised under a new corporate name. They were extracting value before whatever endgame they had planned. I needed to move fast. The most valuable aspects of our ranch weren't the buildings or even the land itself. They were the water rights, mineral rights, and the specific parcel that controlled access to the entire property. Thanks to my careful study of our deeds, I knew exactly which pieces were critical. Now I needed to secure them without alerting James to my knowledge. The discovery of his financial betrayal hurt even more than the affair. This wasn't just about passion or midlife crisis. This was calculated deception designed to strip me of everything we had built together. As I sat in my car looking at the documents proving his fraud, I finally allowed myself to cry the first and last tears I would shed over James Thompson. 3 specialized attorneys, just as Caroline had suggested. 1 for real estate transactions, 1 for asset protection, and 1 for divorce. I met with each in different cities, paid in cash, and used my maiden name for initial consultations. What you're describing is complex, but not impossible, said Edward Franks, the asset protection specialist. The key is to move methodically and within the bounds of the law. We're not trying to hide assets, we're properly securing what's already yours while documenting the misappropriation of funds. We developed a multi-layered strategy. First, I created my own LLC, completely separate from any business tied to James or the ranch. Through this entity, I began legally transferring my personal pre-marital assets and portions of my inheritance that had remained separate from our marital property. Next came the critical phase, securing the most valuable parts of the ranch property. This required delicate timing and careful legal maneuvering. Montana water rights are notoriously complex and extremely valuable. Our ranch's water rights were documented in century-old agreements that predated modern property law. Through my research, I discovered that these rights were technically held in a subsidiary LLC that was explicitly tied to the conservation easement we had established years ago, a legal entity that required both owners' signatures for any substantial pressed changes. Working with the real estate attorney, I filed updated conservation documentation that effectively locked those water rights into an irrevocable trust with specific performance requirements. Any future owner of the ranch would be legally bound to maintain these conservation standards or forfeit the water rights entirely. For the mineral rights, I used a different approach. James had always considered them worthless. "We're not sitting on oil, Cindy, but my research showed potential value in certain rare earth elements becoming increasingly important for technology manufacturing." I quietly transferred my half-interest in the mineral rights to my separate LLC as part of a portfolio diversification strategy that appeared routine on paper. The most important parcel was Lot 720 acres that contained the only viable access road to the ranch from the public highway. Without this access, the remainder of the property would be landlocked and significantly devalued. This required my most creative solution. Years ago, I had loaned my brother $30,000 to start his landscaping business. He had repaid half before hitting financial troubles. I contacted him and proposed a deal I would forgive the remaining debt in exchange for him creating a landscaping company, LLC, that would purchase Lot 7 from our ranch, LLC, at fair market value. The sale would appear completely legitimate, a standard business transaction bringing cash into the ranch operations while securing this critical parcel with someone I trusted. Throughout this process, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy. I managed the ranch, hosted guests, and acted the part of the oblivious wife. I even suggested that Allison help redesign our website, giving her direct access to me so I could monitor her communications. James became increasingly distant, spending more time in town or on business calls. When he was home, he found fault with nearly everything the way I organized, the guest activities, the marketing materials I created, even how I handled the staff. "You're too rigid, Cindy," he complained after I presented the quarterly financial report. "This place needs vision, not just balance sheets." "Numbers tell the true story of any business," I replied calmly. "The vision means nothing if it can't be sustained." He waved dismissively. "That's your problem. You've never understood that some opportunities require risk." "Like risking your wife's financial future for your mistress?" I thought, but said nothing. My trips to town became more frequent as I executed my protection strategy. James noticed. "You're gone a lot lately," he remarked one evening. "Something going on I should know about?" "Just the usual ranch business. Someone has to mind the store while you're building our empire in Seattle," I replied with just enough sweetness to mask the acid. His eyes narrowed. "Are you checking up on me, Cindy? Having me followed?" The accusation was so absurd and so telling in its projection that I actually laughed. "Why would I need to do that? We trust each other, don't we?" The argument that followed was ugly. James accused me of suffocating his vision, of never believing in him, of being cold and calculating instead of supportive and loving. Each accusation revealed more about his own guilt than any failing of mine. When he finally ran out of steam, he dropped his bombshell. "I think we need some time apart, Cindy. A trial separation to figure out what we really want." "A separation?" I kept my voice steady, despite the pounding of my heart. This was it. the beginning of whatever end he had planned. Yes, I think you should go visit your sister in California for a while. Clear your head. Think about whether this ranch life is really what you want. What perfect timing sending me away just as his plans were coming to fruition. I pretended to resist, to be hurt and confused, but ultimately agreed. Maybe you're right. Some distance might help us both gain perspective. The relief on his face was obvious and sickening. He thought he'd won. He had no idea the game I was playing. As I packed for my emotional retreat to my sister's house, I made sure my most important documents were safely stored in multiple secure locations. I had already warned my sister about what was happening and enlisted her as an ally in my countermeasures. The night before my departure, I stood on our bedroom balcony, looking out at the ranch, the fence lines we had repaired together, the barn we had raised, the gardens I had planted. So much love and labor invested in a dream that was now collapsing into betrayal. James came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders in a gesture that once would have been comforting. "This isn't forever," he said softly. "Just a reset." I leaned back against him one last time, memorizing the feeling of what had once been home. "Nothing is forever," I replied, thinking of the protections I had put in place. "But some things last longer than others." California was exactly what I needed: distance to operate without scrutiny. I maintained the appearance of a wife taking time to find herself while working tirelessly to secure my position. My sister Jennifer's guest house became my war room, filled with legal documents, financial statements, and strategy notes. "You're terrifying when you're like this," Jennifer remarked, bringing me coffee one morning as I reviewed a complex trust document. "I learned from the best," I replied, thinking of our grandmother who had rebuilt her life after our grandfather's betrayal. Women in our family don't stay victims for long. My daily calls with James followed a script. I was thinking things through, getting clarity, and missing home but needing more time. He was solicitous and patient on these calls, the perfect understanding husband. Meanwhile, my network of informants at the ranch kept me updated on the reality. Dave, our loyal ranch manager, reported that Allison had moved in less than 24 hours after my departure. The staff was uncomfortable, but afraid to say anything for fear of losing their jobs. Our neighbor, Mrs. Winters, called to tell me she had seen surveyors again, along with men in business suits examining the property. "They looked like developers, Cindy," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Is James selling some of the land?" "I'm not sure, Mrs. Winters, but thank you for letting me know. Please call any time you see something unusual." The most valuable intelligence came from Betty at the county clerk's office, who had taken a liking to me. She called one afternoon with unsettling news. "I thought you should know. There have been some filings regarding your property. Normally, I wouldn't share this, but something doesn't seem right." The filings showed that James was meeting with representatives from a resort development company. They had submitted preliminary environmental impact studies, the first step toward major commercial development. I thanked Betty for the information, then immediately called James. "I've been thinking about coming home next week," I said when he answered. "I miss the ranch." About that, he hesitated. "I'm considering some business changes that might be disruptive. Might be better to extend your stay a bit longer." "What kind of changes?" I pressed, knowing full well what he was hiding. "Nothing concrete yet, just exploring options for the ranch's future. I'll fill you in once things are more definite." Every conversation confirmed that my instincts had been correct. James was accelerating whatever plan he had in motion, likely hoping to present me with a fait accompli upon my return. 3 weeks into my separation, I received an unexpected call from Jeffrey Stanford, our longtime attorney. "Cindy, I wanted to reach out directly," he began, his voice strained. "I've resigned as your family attorney. May I ask why?" I kept my voice neutral, though my pulse quickened. "Professional differences with James regarding some proposed transactions. I don't feel comfortable saying more, except that you might want to seek independent legal advice regarding the ranch property." Jeffrey's call was the red flag I had been waiting for. Whatever James was planning had crossed a line that even our morally flexible attorney couldn't stomach. The next morning, the other shoe dropped. I received an official legal document via courier, a notice of property transfer filed with the county. Reading through the dense legal language, I deciphered the shocking truth. James had exploited a loophole in our complex ownership structure to sell the entire ranch to Allison for just $5 through a process called a strawman deed transfer. The maneuver was as clever as it was underhanded. By manipulating the multiple layers of LLCs and taking advantage of provisions meant for related party transfers, he had effectively signed over the ranch to Allison while bypassing normal sale requirements and my right of refusal as co-owner. On paper, at least, I had just lost my home and business for less than the cost of a fast food meal. I immediately called James, rage and disbelief competing in my mind. "What is this document I just received?" I demanded when he answered. "Ah, that arrived already? I was going to call you about that." His voice was calm, rehearsed. "It's just a legal restructuring, Cindy. Part of the business evolution we need. You sold our ranch to Allison for $5. Technically, yes, but it's more complicated than that. It's a strategic business move that protects our interests while allowing for necessary growth." "Our interests? Or yours and Allison's?" There was a pause before he dropped all pretense. "Look, Cindy, things change. People change. Allison and I have a vision for the property that aligns with where the market is going. You were never going to embrace that vision. So you stole my home, my business, everything we built together?" "I didn't steal anything. I made a business decision. The ranch was always more mine than yours anyway. My inheritance paid for most of it." The blatant rewriting of history took my breath away. My finance expertise, my business acumen, my daily management, all erased in his self-serving narrative. "I'm coming home," I said firmly. "Tomorrow. We'll discuss this face to face." "If you think that's best," he replied, the smugness evident in his voice. "But the paperwork is already filed, Cindy. You might want to bring a good attorney." I hung up and immediately called my team of lawyers. The strawman deed transfer was aggressive and potentially fraudulent, but challenging it would mean lengthy court battles with uncertain outcomes. Better to execute the next phase of my plan. That night, I packed my bags and booked a flight to Montana. James thought I was returning as a defeated adversary, coming to beg for scraps from what he had stolen. He had no idea I was arriving as a conqueror, ready to reveal just how completely I had outmaneuvered him. The ranch looked the same as I drove up the familiar gravel road, but it felt alien, like revisiting a childhood home now occupied by strangers. Dave met me at the gate, his weathered face tight with concern. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry about all this. None of us knew what was happening until it was done." "It's not your fault, Dave," I assured him. "Is he here?" "In the main house, with Miss Allison. They've been meeting with designers all morning." I drove past the staff cabins to the main lodge. My home. At least it had been. Now I was technically trespassing on property owned by my cousin. James and Allison were in the great room with a team of people hovering over architectural drawings spread across our reclaimed wood dining table. They all looked up as I entered. The strangers seemed confused. James looked annoyed. Allison had the decency to appear at least slightly uncomfortable. "Cindy," James recovered quickly, plastering on his charming smile. "You should have called to let us know exactly when you were arriving. We're in the middle of something." "I can see that." I set down my bag and looked around the room. "Planning the renovations already?" "Early stages," Allison spoke up, her voice overly bright. "We're thinking of converting the east wing into luxury spa suites. The market research shows high demand." "How fascinating," I replied. "And what does the market research say about properties without legal access to water?" A flicker of confusion crossed her face. James stepped forward. "Cindy, why don't we talk privately? I'm sure you have questions about the transition." "No need for privacy. I'm sure your new business partner should hear this too." The design team looked increasingly uncomfortable. James dismissed them with a wave. "We'll continue this later." Once they had filed out, James's demeanor changed completely. The charming host vanished, replaced by the cold-eyed stranger I had glimpsed in recent months. "I know this is difficult," he began, his tone patronizing, "but fighting it will only make things worse for you." "Is that a threat, James?" "It's reality. The transfer is complete and legal. The ranch belongs to Whispering Pines Resort LLC now, with Allison as the principal owner." "And what do I get from this restructuring?" James gestured to a leather portfolio on the table. "I've prepared a very generous settlement. Half of our liquid assets, plus a monthly stipend for 2 years while you restart your career." "How thoughtful." I made no move to touch the portfolio. "And if I choose not to accept this generous offer? Then things get complicated and expensive, with no guarantee you'll do any better." "My lawyer assures me the transfer will stand up to challenges." "Your hotshot city lawyer?" I asked. "The one who helped you with this brilliant maneuver?" "He's the best in the business for complex property transactions," James boasted. "From Harrington, Wade, and Bell in Seattle." "Impressive credentials," I nodded. "Did he happen to mention that strawman transfers require full disclosure to all interested parties, or they can constitute fraud?" James waved dismissively. "Everything was disclosed in the LLC operating agreements. You signed those years ago." "Did I?" I smiled thinly. "I guess we'll find out exactly what I signed when we get to court." Allison, who had been watching our exchange like a tennis match, finally spoke up. "James, maybe we should consider a more equitable arrangement. Family is still family." I turned to her, this cousin who had betrayed me so completely. "That's your takeaway from sleeping with my husband and stealing my home? Family is family?" She flinched but held her ground. "Business is business, Cindy. The ranch wasn't reaching its potential. We have investors ready to take it to the next level." "With the $300,000 James borrowed against our property to fund your failing design business?" I asked sweetly. James's face hardened. "You've been digging into things that don't concern you anymore." "Everything about this ranch concerns me." I moved to the large picture window overlooking the property. "Did you explain to your investors that the most valuable parts of this ranch aren't included in your clever little transfer?" "What are you talking about?" James demanded, the first note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I think it's time we had that meeting with the lawyers. I'll have mine here tomorrow at 10. Bring your hotshot from Seattle. I'm sure he'll be fascinated to learn about the oversights in his master plan." I turned to leave, but James caught my arm. "What did you do, Cindy?" I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. "I protected what was mine. Something you should understand completely." As I walked out, I heard Allison ask in a worried voice, "James? What is she talking about?" I slept in the manager's cabin that night, grateful for Dave's loyalty. In the morning, I prepared for the confrontation that would determine my future. My 3 attorneys arrived early, and we reviewed our strategy one final time. "Remember," Paula advised, "we're negotiating from strength, but don't reveal everything at once. Let them discover the depth of their predicament gradually." James arrived with his Seattle attorney, a sleek man named Lawrence Wilson, and a local lawyer I didn't recognize. Allison came separately with her own counsel. We gathered in the ranch's conference room, the tension palpable. Lawrence took control immediately, laying out documents showing the completed transfer and a settlement offer that he described as more than generous considering the circumstances. "My client is prepared to be extraordinarily accommodating," he stated, "despite having no legal obligation to provide anything beyond what's outlined here." My lead attorney, Paula, listened politely before responding. "That's a fascinating perspective, Mr. Wilson. Before we discuss settlements, however, we should clarify exactly what your clients have acquired through this transfer." She nodded to me. This was the moment I had prepared for when I would reveal the first layer of protection I had quietly put in place. I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room projector. Let me show you something interesting about Whispering Pines Ranch. The screen displayed a complex map of the property with color-coded sections. The deed transfer you executed so cleverly applies only to these areas in blue: the main lodge, most of the outbuildings, and approximately 400 acres of the land. James leaned forward, frowning. That's the entire ranch. Not quite. I zoomed in on specific sections. These areas in red represent the water rights, which were transferred 6 months ago to the Whispering Pines Conservation Trust, an irrevocable entity requiring two-party consensus for any modifications. I clicked to the next slide. These areas in green represent the mineral rights, which were legally transferred to my separate LLC as part of portfolio diversification. Another click. And this critical 20-acre parcel in yellow is now owned by Thompson Landscaping LLC, a separate company that holds the only legal access road to the property from the public highway. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Lawrence Wilson recovered first. These transfers, if they occurred, would represent a breach of the operating agreement. Would they? Paula slid a stack of documents across the table. These are the original operating agreements for each entity involved. You'll note that Article 7, Section 3 specifically permits members to transfer individual interests in subsidiary assets for appropriate consideration. Each transfer was properly documented and filed with all relevant authorities. James's face had gone from confident to ashen. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew what I was planning." "I knew something wasn't right," I corrected him. "So I protected myself, legally and transparently." Lawrence was rapidly flipping through the documents, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "These appear to be in order, but we'll need to verify." "Verify all you want," Paula interrupted. "In the meantime, let me explain what this means practically. The resort you're planning cannot operate without water rights, which my client now controls. It cannot be accessed by guests without use of the private road, which my client's brother now owns. And any future mineral extraction which our geological surveys suggest could be quite valuable belongs to my client's separate business entity." Allison looked stricken. "James? Is this true? Did you buy me a useless property?" "Not useless," I interjected. "Just worth perhaps 1/10 of what you thought, which, to be fair, is still 1,000 times more than the $5 you paid for it." Lawrence huddled with James and the local attorney, their urgent whispers filling the room. When they broke, Lawrence addressed us with forced composure. "We need to adjourn to consider these developments. Perhaps we can reconvene tomorrow after consulting with our clients." "Of course," Paula agreed smoothly. "We're in no rush. My client is quite comfortable with the current situation." As they gathered their materials to leave, I added one final revelation. "Oh, and you should know that I've documented all of James's financial misconduct, including the misappropriation of loan funds secured with marital property." The IRS and banking authorities tend to take a dim view of such activities. James froze, his expression a mixture of rage and fear. "You wouldn't." "I haven't yet," I clarified. "What happens next depends entirely on how reasonable you both choose to be." As they filed out, the reality of their situation written clearly on their faces, I felt no triumph, no joy, just the quiet satisfaction of having protected what was rightfully mine. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since discovering their betrayal, I knew with certainty that I would emerge victorious. The settlement negotiations lasted 3 grueling days. James's initial bravado crumbled as his Seattle attorney gradually realized the depth of the legal quicksand they faced. By the afternoon of the second day, Lawrence Wilson had taken James aside for what appeared to be a brutally honest conversation. When they returned, James's demeanor had shifted from defiance to grim resignation. "We need to resolve this situation," Lawrence announced, all traces of his earlier arrogance gone. "My client is prepared to discuss a global settlement that addresses all parties' interests." What followed was a complex dance of proposals and counterproposals. The truth had become undeniable without my cooperation. The ranch was essentially unusable for their grand resort plans. Without access to water, road rights, and with the threat of financial fraud investigations hanging over them, James and Allison had lost nearly all their leverage. On the third day, Allison arrived without James. "He's not feeling well," she explained, not meeting anyone's eyes. The truth emerged later. Through Dave, James had been drinking heavily, raging about my betrayal of his vision. The irony was apparently lost on him. By the end of negotiations, we had reached a resolution that even my attorneys considered remarkable. Allison would transfer the ranch property back to a new entity controlled by me. In exchange, she would receive a modest cash settlement and be released from any liability for her role in the scheme. James would relinquish all claims to the ranch and our other marital assets. He would receive a small percentage of future profits from the ranch business, enough to live on, but not enough to fund the lavish lifestyle he had envisioned with Allison. Most importantly, I would not pursue criminal charges for the financial misconduct, provided he fully cooperated with unwinding the fraudulent transactions. When the final documents were signed, Allison approached me privately. "I never thought it would go this far," she said, her voice small. "It started as just a flirtation, and then somehow you were living in my house, sleeping in my bed, and planning to steal my life's work. I finished for her. Save the explanations, Allison. We're done here." The following week brought another surprise. I received a call from the resort development company that James had been courting. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Daniel Reeves from Pinnacle Resorts. We understand you're now the principal owner of Whispering Pines Ranch." "That's correct. We'd still be interested in discussing partnership opportunities, if you're open to it. Our initial research suggests the property has exceptional potential with the right approach." The right approach being what, exactly? "Sustainable luxury experiences that preserve the natural environment while providing exceptional value to guests. Your existing operation already aligns with our philosophy. We'd be looking to enhance, not replace." We agreed to a preliminary meeting. Unlike James's vision of paving paradise for maximum profit, Pinnacle's approach emphasized responsible development that would maintain the ranch's character while improving its economic potential. Their offer to purchase a 40% stake in the operation, leaving me with controlling interest, was fair and thoughtfully structured. 2 months later, I signed the partnership agreement. The capital infusion allowed me to buy out James's remaining interest entirely and fund the new direction I had envisioned for Whispering Pines. During this period, I rarely saw James. He had moved to Seattle, reportedly living in a modest apartment while trying to rebuild his career. Allison had also left town, returning to her hometown in Oregon. According to local gossip, their relationship had not survived the collapse of their scheme. One afternoon, as the renovations for the enhanced ranch experience were underway, I received an unexpected visitor. James's mother, Eleanor, had always been kind to me, remaining neutral during our separation. "I wanted to see how you're doing," she said as we sat on the veranda overlooking the property, "and to say that while James is my son and I love him, I don't condone what he did." "Thank you, Eleanor. That means a lot." "He lost his way," she continued, watching the construction crews in the distance. "Got caught up in some fantasy and forgot what was real and valuable." She turned to me with sad eyes. "His father and I raised him better than that." "I believe you did," I said gently. "Some lessons people have to learn the hard way." "What will you do with the ranch now?" she asked. I shared my vision, a place that would continue to offer luxury experiences but would also serve a higher purpose. "I'm converting the East Wing into a retreat center for women rebuilding their lives after setbacks. Professional development, financial education, legal resources, all the things I needed when my world was turned upside down." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Beauty from ashes. That's what my grandmother would have called it." 1 year after the failed transfer, Whispering Pines Ranch hosted its first Phoenix Rising retreat for 20 women navigating major life transitions. Some were divorce survivors like me. Others were recovering from career setbacks, health crises, or financial disasters. All were determined to emerge stronger. Standing before them in the great room where I had confronted James and Allison, I shared parts of my story not to center myself, but to assure them that recovery and reinvention were possible. The greatest power we have, I told them, is the power to prepare, to educate ourselves, to quietly build foundations that can withstand the storms we never expect but should always anticipate. As I looked out at their faces, some tearful, some determined, all engaged, I realized that the ranch had finally become what it was meant to be. Not just a luxury destination, but a place of transformation. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had instead forced me to become more strategic, more resilient, and ultimately more purposeful than I might otherwise have been. The $2 million ranch that James had tried to steal for $5 had become something far more valuable, a testament to the quiet power of preparation and the strength that comes from protecting what matters most. After the session, I walked down to the creek that had taught me to be like water patient, persistent, finding my way around obstacles rather than trying to smash through them. The setting sun turned the surface to molten gold, reflecting the lodge lights as they came on for evening. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of a woman who's already won. What would you do if you suspected someone close to you was being dishonest? Would you confront them immediately, or would you gather information first? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to our channel for more stories about resilience and transformation. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message about preparation and quiet strength, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the wisdom to protect what matters most in your own life.